Good afternoon, y'all. All, whatever, however you want to be called. It's been a while since I've done one of these videos. My Doctor Who Revisited series. As you may remember, when I did my first one last fall, I originally designed these to be kind of the continuation of the full DVD series overview that I've been doing for the show's 50th anniversary, which at this point, seeing as that was almost 2 years ago now, still calling it that would be kind of redundant. But we've almost gotten through to the halfway point. So today, we're going to be taking a look at what is not necessarily a series in its own, but it is a collection of episodes and does represent what really is the final year of David Tennant's tenure as the Doctor. I am, of course, talking about Doctor Who The Specials, or as the DVD refers to it, the Complete Specials. What I'm also going to do is add a link to the DVD review that I did back in 2010 of the Complete Specials box set, which was actually the first complete box set of Doctor Who to come out, because these were actually the first to be shot in high definition. So hopefully I've remembered, and the link should be in the bottom, and I'm going to double check it, but I'm pretty sure it's not one of the videos that suffers from audio issues. Of course, if it is, I'll have it uploaded by the time, or re-uploaded by the time this video actually shows up. But if you don't see it, then that means that the video is fine. Now on to the subject at hand, which is the Complete Specials. This series, well, not series, but collection of specials, which was originally announced back in late 2007. I remember a lot of people are actually kind of pissed off when they announced this. This was actually before Series 4 had aired in 2008, at least 6 months before. And I remember some people are pissed off because they saw this as being the end of Doctor Who, or they were just going to be scaling it down. But ultimately, the main reason was David Tennant just had other commitments and things that he had to be doing at the time. So instead of doing just a complete series, they did just the specials, which I think was a better option than taking the show off entirely for a year. But this extended seasons or less Doctor Who would really become the norm over the years that would follow. This, we had Matt Smith's seasons became split. Series 7 was shown in 2 completely different years. So this would be something that would become used to. It seems now they're back to one full series a year for at least the immediate future with Peter Capaldi's Doctor. So that's a definite advantage. At least we know for a while it's not going to be going off. But I remember when this was announced, I know most people were thinking, okay, so David Tennant, they want to keep him, so they're going to just do this for a year and then he'll come back for Series 5. Because this was long before, I think, well over a year before, in fact, even more so, I think, before David Tennant actually announced his departure. So what we were expecting was it was going to be a year of specials, and then he'd come back and do Series 5, and we'd figured that Series 5 would be his last. Of course, as we all know, that ended up not being the case, and the specials ended up being his swan song. But notably, as I've already said, what distinguishes these is starting in 2009, this was the beginning of Doctor Who in high definition. And what we'll notice, everything with the exception of the next Doctor, which was shot in standard def and then upgraded to high definition later for the Blu-ray, you'll notice here the show looks very different. David Tennant and, Christopher Eccleston's eras really had a very distinctive look to them, and really, was the fact that they were done in standard definition. They just didn't look like Matt Smith's era, with the exception of the final 4 specials and 3 stories of the David Tennant era. So that was a definite step forward that we saw with these. To begin with, in late 2008, or December 25th, 2008, we had the annual Christmas special, which is really the beginning of these complete specials, but in many ways it's kind of separate, mainly because it's not high definition. It doesn't necessarily follow through with the arc of the remaining stories, and in many ways it's pretty much attached to, at least chronologically, narratively, all that kind of stuff. I've always considered it kind of attached to the end of Series 4. But the title itself was actually misleading when we first saw it. The next Doctor, okay, what are we getting? A foreshadowing of whoever is going to be Doctor Who number 11, which at this point Tennant still hadn't announced he was departing. And it seemed like it was going to be something interesting, to put it mildly, but it obviously, as we've seen from the story itself, it definitely wasn't. But we see David Morrissey come in, Jackson Lake, a very tragic character who has developed taken on the persona of the Doctor to hide traumatic events that had occurred in his own life. And that part was fine. I think the problem that I had with this one, which is something that I think has kind of plagued the new series as it's gone through, is the Cybermen once again are almost as a side character to the main story. They're almost a supporting enemy. There is the threat, but I think they've been underdeveloped throughout the course of the show, and I think there's a lot more that they could actually have done with them than has actually been done in the stories they've been in, and this is just another example. But this is the end of Standard Def Doctor Who, which kind of ends an era. You can almost visually, you can almost split the new series in half at that level. But anyways, yeah, so that's the next Doctor, neither here nor there. I actually did I don't have the DVD anymore, but I'll also put a link of the review of the DVD down in the description below. And next we're on to Doctor Who's one and only Easter special, and was the only story that aired in 2009 that previously would have been during the same time of the year where the entire series would be airing. So it did kind of have almost that Doctor Who season premiere feel to it. Notably, this was, I think at that point, the most expensive individual story that had actually been made for the new series. Is obviously not doing a full series. They could spread the budget out a little bit more between the major specials. So we see the beginning of Doctor Who in high definition. This was also one of the first Blu-rays to come out. Actually, Planet of the Dead, and I'll reference that video as well, but Planet of the Dead, the vanilla single disc release, was, along with Torchwood Children of Earth, the first Blu-rays that BBC actually put out. So it makes it kind of notable for that. I don't have that DVD or that Blu-ray anymore either, but the video still exists, so you'll see that linked in the bottom as well. This story itself brings up one of the problems that I had with both this and Waters of Mars, the story that followed it. I really didn't like either of the companion characters. And these were not regular companions, they were just what Doctor Who has done for many of the specials, starting with the Christmas special, having a one-off companion. And I don't find either of these very likable, really, whatsoever. In Planet of the Dead, we have Michelle Ryan, Lady Christina D'Souza, who really just struck me as just a snooty, self-obsessed, rich person. And yeah, there's some attempts maybe to put some compassion sort of under the surface there, but I just found that the character just completely unlikable, be honest. And a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I couldn't stand her. Kind of like, as I've mentioned, I start to like Rose less and less as the years go by. I think I like this character even less. Be honest, I found her kind of a bitch. And that's really all I kind of have to say on that line of reasoning right there. But yeah, just, personal taste, I just didn't like this companion at all. The story itself was, kind of interesting. And if you actually think about what the Planet of the Dead actually is, spoiler alert, it's dead people. That itself is kind of disturbing, but in a very Doctor Who-ish way. The show, the special itself was relatively well appreciated, if you want to call it that. The appreciation index was 88, which is pretty high for Doctor Who. The effects were cool. The bus, if you've watched Doctor Who Confidential, you know that the bus was completely destroyed while being shipped over, so they found something creative to do with it, basically beating the crap out of it and turning the destroyed bus into part of the narrative, which was pretty original, unique, way of turning a crisis into a plot point. But I don't know if I'd necessarily call this the strongest special. I think the story itself probably is the strongest of the four specials throughout the year. But definitely, there are stronger Christmas specials if you want to look at sort of the one-off episodes. So yeah, that is Planet of the Dead. Now to Waters of Mars. This is a notable story for a number of reasons. Obviously, the second to be filmed in high definition, the second special. I think at this point, the budget for this one was even more than the Waters of Mars. So this may even still be, perhaps maybe with the exception of Day of the Doctor, one of the most expensive Doctor Who stories ever made. And so there's that behind it. The story itself is interesting. It's almost kind of like the claustrophobic type of stories that we might have seen in the Pat Troughton era, which makes it a little bit unique from what we regularly see from Doctor Who. We have yet another guest companion, which I think is actually the most unpleasant probably in Doctor Who history. Lindsay Duncan as Adelaide Brooke. I don't really see any redeeming characteristics in her whatsoever. She's just unpleasant. She's not even enjoyable to watch. I think the story maybe could have done without her, except she does contribute to the major plot point, or what the major kind of aim of this story was in terms of the greater story of the Doctor, which we see at the end. There's the question of, what happens to the Doctor if he travels without a companion for an extended period of time, and we see that manifest itself in the Time Lord Victorious. And it gives us an idea of what happens, if the Doctor is not necessarily, contained. He can kind of go off the rails a little bit. But keep in mind, the original characterization was actually very dark. If we go back and look at William Hartnell, for example, he was not necessarily a heroic figure, so we know that he definitely has that in him in terms of his character arc. The problem that I had is I think they could have taken this a little bit further. We see the idea come up of the Time Lord Victorious at the end of Waters of Mars. So the Doctor goes on this ego trip and really manifests itself at the end of the episode, and then we really see that arc gone by the time he comes back in the End of Time, which I think this is a wasted opportunity. And I think Russell T Davies did not necessarily like taking risks with the show. He liked making big episodes, but he didn't want to go too far in terms of character development. But I think rather than have the two-parter at the end, I think there's a story or an opportunity for a story in the middle that is actually missing here. What this should have been is we should have had an entire story where the Doctor is just completely off the rails, and we see this Time Lord Victorious played out more than it is in the actual episode, or just a few minutes of the episode. We could have a whole episode long or special long interpretation of this kind of evil version of the Doctor, which we've seen. And David Tennant, even though he is in some ways one of the more comedic ones, I think he is also one of the more dangerous versions of the Doctor. William Hartnell wasn't necessarily dangerous, he was just grumpy. But if you look at Tom Baker and Sylvester McCoy, even though both of them on the surface were also comedic, there was a dark side to both those characterizations that doesn't necessarily exist in any of the other characterizations. Even Peter Capaldi, his characterization is very upfront about the negative aspects of his personality. But with these three Doctors, Baker, McCoy, and Tennant, there's always something under the surface. You got the impression that Doctor Who number 4 could be very dangerous. We did see his temper come out a few times, and there's just that hint of danger to him. Sylvester McCoy became a dark character as he went through the incarnation. He started off as a Troughton-like clown and then became probably the most devious incarnation. But we also see this with Tennant, with the no second chances thing that's introduced at the beginning of the episode. And we see it at various times throughout his run where, yes, indeed, he can be a very dangerous character. And I to this day, I still think it's a missed opportunity to have that played out in a full episode. It may have turned people off of the Doctor, but this was a Doctor that was going to regenerate anyway. So how about a story of, Doctor Who number 10, or, well, number 11, 10 or 11, depending on how you sit on that argument, but the Tennant Doctor, there's an opportunity. What happens if a regeneration goes horribly wrong? And I think they could have played that out, and that is ultimately what leads to the regeneration. This version of the Doctor has been corrupted, and he needs a reset. And then we see Matt Smith, who is probably the lightest of all the Doctors, with very little of that dangerous edge. Matt Smith's version is kind of the answer to that, where that whole dark persona has been completely subdued. So just my own thoughts on it, and a lot of people probably won't agree with me and think that may have been a little too far, but I think they could have maybe done something with that would have gone a little bit further. Then we go on to The End of Time, the two-parter that ends David Tennant's run, and there are a number of things obviously beyond the regeneration that makes this story notable. And one thing that I've noticed as time goes by, people either seem to love this story or they hate it. I don't like it as much as I did when I first saw it back in 2010, which was a long time ago now. Late 2009, early 2010, over 5 years ago now. Well, 5.5 at the recording of this video, which is absolutely horrifying how quickly, time just flies. But here we see Russell T Davies, wanting to say goodbye to the 10th Doctor in the most spectacular way possible, and definitely outdo the departure of Christopher Eccleston. And I think a main reason for that is by this point we were invested in the 10th Doctor the way I don't think we ever really did with the 9th, because he was only there for 13 weeks and he was gone. Tennant, by the time he left, had been there for a little over 4 years. So this was going to be the first regeneration since the series came back that would really impact people. I think the Matt Smith regeneration sequence was a lot more impactful because of the way it was done. But, they were... And this was going to be the end of, basically, the production team, the end of Tennant. We were going to see, aside from Murray Gold and a few other people, almost a complete switch over a few months later in season 10, almost an entirely new show. So this was the last hurrah, and they wanted to go out in the most spectacular way they could. Also, in contrast to the previous two stories, this one has what is one of my favorite companions. I actually would have loved Bernard Cribbins to have become a regular for even a season. I found that him and the Doctor worked really well together. So we have that. We also see the return of John Sim as the Master, perhaps even more insane here than he was in the previous story, or the previous time he'd appeared, which was about a year and a half previous at the end of season 7. I am still at this point torn which worked better, either him or Missy, and I don't know if I'll actually be the season when I see where they go with it in season 9, which one I think is better. We see former James Bond Timothy Dalton as the president, kind of the evil president of Gallifrey. There's the debate on whether this really is Rassilon or not. They never really cover how that happened, because as far as we all know, he was supposed to have been dead a long time ago. I think it's actually been covered in books as to what happened. But yeah, so that's kind of a vague area as to who this actually is. There's also the character which is intended to be the Doctor's mother, the one that comes to him in the TV, and we see her in the background, which is never really covered explicitly in the script. But I think in earlier versions that what it's supposed to be, or it's supposed to be implied that, but it's definitely not overt. We see Donna Noble come back, and I think it's kind of a shame that they didn't go further with her in this story, but I guess because of the character arc or the issues at the end of season 8, they couldn't really do it. But even do one of those things where it's a memory wipe, because I actually would have loved to have seen Donna. I think she's still by far my favorite regular companion of the new series, and I think it's just because she was characterized differently. Maybe it's because she was a little bit older. I found her a lot easier to take than some of the other ones, and at some point I'm actually going to do a video on why I like and dislike certain companions in greater detail. But so we see that come back. And in terms of the story itself, this builds upon the arc of the Time War, which we see picked up again in Day of the Doctor, and then it's something that's still going, and it's something I honestly hope they don't resolve it too soon, because I think this is, one of those things that they could draw out for a while, even for a few Doctors, because it's not something that necessarily needs to be solved right away. Now, in terms of the regeneration, I don't think it needed to be drawn out for 20 minutes or half an hour or however long it was. I guess it was kind of nice to revisit things, but I don't know. I could have done without that. I would have maybe preferred more on... I think they could have drawn out the main story of the Gallifrey arc a little bit further in the story. I am not a fan... I don't think I minded originally, but now when I look back at it, and especially when I compare it to the departure of Matt Smith, I don't like the way they portrayed, the final minutes of the Doctor, selfish, not wanting to regenerate. But this was also Doctor number 10. This was the vain interpretation of the Doctor. On top of that danger thing, this was by far, well, maybe even more so in the third Doctor, the most vain interpretation of the Doctor that we've ever seen. So there's kind of that he did, and this is also the version that regenerated into his own face previously, but that is kind of a plot hole. If he, wanted to keep the face and he'd already regenerated into the same face, then why didn't he just do it again and keep regenerating into the 10th Doctor? If he didn't want to go that far, maybe it's just the difference of the hand that was in the TARDIS in Series 8, but I don't know. It is kind of a plot hole. But it's one of those plot holes that we'll ignore. But so we see him leave, and then we see Matt Smith come in, which is a completely... Well, actually, I wouldn't even say really a completely reinvention. But that danger element really is removed, which is the complete change with Matt Smith. But there's still on the surface, Tennant was always lighter, and pretty much his whole persona, except for a few incidents, Matt Smith was the lightest interpretation of the Doctor. But we're going to cover that a little bit further when I go into some of the later, when I start doing the Matt Smith stories, which will be coming up shortly. But anyways, I've gone on for, a little over 22 minutes at this point, so I think it's time to end this video. So that was Doctor Who The Complete Specials Revisited. So as always, everyone, thank you for watching, and have a great day. Or, I guess in this case, not watching, I'm just narrating this, so listening with a picture on screen. But anyways, thanks everyone, have a great day.